The morning Hope stepped off the stagecoach, grief was already waiting for her. The wind never stopped talking on the Wyoming prairie. It scraped across the open land like it had something to say to anyone brave enough to listen. Hope felt it the moment her boots touched the dirt. She had traveled 2,000 miles for a future she believed in with her whole heart. She had crossed plains, rivers, and endless sky carrying a folded letter, a plain gold wedding band, and the promise of a life she had never seen. She expected a man to be waiting. Instead, she found silence, pity, and a grave. The year was 1878. 6 weeks earlier, Hope Voss had left Boston behind on a rattling train, her past shrinking with every mile west. The war had taken her father. Debt had taken the family home. Her teaching position was gone. What the letters from Thine Coric had felt like a lifeline. He wrote of Wyoming as a place where hard work mattered more than pedigree, where a woman could be a partner instead of a shadow. He did not want a servant or a cook. He wanted an equal. That promise carried her across the country. The stagecoach creaked to a stop in the tiny settlement of Clearwater Creek. The driver swung the door open and called the last stop. Hope was the only passenger left. She stepped down carefully, her boots sinking into the dry earth, and looked around for the man she was meant to marry. No one waved. No one smiled. The town was smaller than she imagined. One dusty street, a trading post, a saloon with worn batwing doors, a half-finished hotel, a small church leaning under a crooked steeple. Hope asked the driver where she could find Thane Coric of Sweetwater Ranch. The man paused with her trunk in his hands and looked at her with something close to sorrow. He told her to see the sheriff. That was when fear took root. The sheriff's office was a simple plank building with a wooden star swinging from the porch. Inside, Sheriff Gage Hollow looked up from his desk the moment Hope stepped in. He already knew her name. He asked her to sit. She stayed standing. Her heart knew the truth before her ears heard it. 3 days earlier, Thane Coric and 2 other ranchers had been ambushed while driving cattle to market. None of them survived. A cavalry patrol found the bodies. The funeral would be the next morning. Hope did not cry. She could not. The words felt unreal, like they belonged to someone else. Yet she had crossed half a continent to marry a man she had never seen, and now she was being told he was dead. The letters she had read and reread until the paper softened in her hands were all that remained of him. The sheriff offered her a room at the hotel and a seat on the next stage back east. Hope sat down then, her strength giving way. Back east meant nothing. She had sold everything to come west. There was no home waiting for her there. She asked what would happen to Sweetwater Ranch. The sheriff told her the bank would likely take it. Thane had no family nearby. Without a will or a marriage certificate, the law would not recognize her claim. Hope listened quietly, her fingers wrapped tight around the last letter Thane had written. In it, he promised her a life and asked her to trust him. Something inside her hardened. She asked to see the ranch. The next morning, Clearwater Creek gathered on a low hill overlooking town. 3 fresh graves waited under the open sky. Hope stood apart from the crowd, mourning a man she had never touched, but somehow already lost. She felt the weight of what might have been pressing down on her chest. After the service, a woman named Juniper Vale approached her. Her husband had been killed in the same ambush. Juniper spoke plainly and without self-pity. She told Hope that this land tested everyone who came to it, but it rewarded those who stayed. Those words followed Hope all the way back to the hotel. That night, she sat on the narrow bed under the dim glow of an oil lamp and reread Thane's letters. He described Sweetwater Creek cutting through green pasture, a log cabin built with his own hands. and a future shaped by work and shared purpose. He wrote that he wanted a woman with backbone and sense, not a housekeeper, a partner. By dawn, Hope knew she was not ready to leave. 2 days later, the sheriff drove her out to Sweetwater Ranch. The land opened up before them as they crested a low rise. A bright creek wound through a wide valley. Cottonwoods lined the banks. A sturdy cabin sat near the water with a small barn and corral nearby. Cattle grazed in the distance, unaware that their owner was gone. Hope's breath caught. It was more beautiful than the letters ever said. The signs of sudden absence were everywhere. A bucket left by the door. Firewood stacked neatly. A chair angled on the porch to catch the sun. Inside, the cabin was clean and solid. A wide hearth, a heavy table, shelves lined with books and supplies. On the desk lay a ledger filled with careful numbers and plans. The last entry mentioned buying white paint for the cabin trim and noted her arrival date. Thane had been ready for her. Hope closed the book and felt the decision settle deep in her bones. She told the sheriff she was staying. He warned her that the territory was dangerous, especially for a woman alone. He spoke of outlaws and winter and the hard truth of ranch work. Hope listened, then told him she could read, write, keep accounts, and hire help. She told him she had crossed 2,000 miles on a promise and would not walk away from it now. The sheriff shook his head, but did not stop her. That first night alone at Sweetwater, Hope slept little. The wind moved through the cottonwoods, and coyotes called from the hills. At dawn, she stepped outside and breathed in the sharp, clean air. Thane's horse waited in the corral. She fed him, clumsy but determined. Inside the barn, she found tools, a wagon, and firearms Thane had kept for protection. By midday, neighbors rode in. A woman named Sable Wren and her son came to offer help. They spoke honestly, warning Hope that ranching was no simple thing. Hope did not pretend otherwise. She told them she would learn. Sable saw the resolve behind her words and agreed to help her gather the scattered cattle. The work was harder than anything Hope had known. She learned to sit a horse the Western way. She fell. She bruised. She got back up. By sunset, they had brought most of the herd home. That evening, as the sky burned gold over Sweetwater Creek, Hope stood on the porch and looked out over the land. She had come west to become a wife. Instead, she stood on the edge of becoming something else entirely. She did not know what dangers lay ahead. She did not know if the law would stand with her, but she knew one thing with absolute clarity. She was not leaving. Sweetwater Ranch would not be abandoned. Neither would she. The days after Hope decided to stay did not slow down or soften. They pressed in harder, as if the land itself wanted to test whether her resolve was real. Hope woke before sunrise every morning. The cabin was quiet except for the wind brushing the walls and the soft creak of wood settling in the cold. She learned the shape of the place by heart, where the floorboard groaned, which window caught the morning light, how the creek sounded different after rain. This was no longer a stop along the way. It was home, and whether she was ready or not. Sable Wren returned with her son and a young ranch hand named Quill Draven. Quill had worked for Thane the previous season. He was barely 18, freckled, quiet, and capable. When Hope asked if he would stay on, he agreed without hesitation. Thane had treated him fair, and that mattered in this country. Together, they began the work of holding Sweetwater together. They rode the range to gather cattle that had drifted after Thane's death. Hope followed more than she led, watching how Quill moved his horse, how Sable read the land. Her muscles burned, her hands blistered. She said little and learned fast. By the end of the week, She could ride without fear and dismount without stumbling. Branding day came sooner than she expected. The smell of burning hair turned her stomach, but Sable told her plain that an unmarked calf was a dead calf in Wyoming. Rustlers did not bother with brands they could be traced to. Hope kept the fire hot and the irons ready, her jaw tight as the calves bawled and kicked. By sundown, every new calf carried Sweetwater's mark. That night, Hope slept hard for the first time since arriving. The next morning brought trouble. A man rode in from the east, slow and confident, with 2 others trailing behind him. His clothes were finer than most ranchers wore, and his horse was well fed. He introduced himself as Drury Falk, owner of the Double Bar Ranch. His smile never reached his eyes. Falk offered condolences for Thane's death. Then he offered money. He said Sweetwater was too much for a woman alone. He said accidents happened out here. He said she would be wise to sell now and return east with a comfortable purse. Hope listened without interrupting, her hands folded in her lap. When she refused, his smile thinned. He left her with an offer and a warning. Wrapped together. 30 days. After that, he said, the land would decide. Sable watched him ride away with a face carved from stone. She told Hope that Falk had been swallowing up smaller ranches for years. Men who refused to sell often lost cattle, fences, or worse. Nothing could ever be proven. Hope thanked her for the honesty. She did not sleep well that night. 2 days later, Hope found a letter hidden in Thane's desk. It was unfinished. In it, he wrote that Falk had been pressing him to sell, and that cattle had been turning up shot on the far pasture. He suspected hired men, but had no proof. The letter ended mid-sentence. Hope folded the page with shaking hands. Thane's death had not been random. She rode into Clearwater Creek the next morning to file her continuation claim on the homestead. The land office clerk looked at her papers with open doubt. She argued calmly, citing the law as she understood it. She presented Thane's letters and the sheriff's statement. The clerk agreed to forward the claim for review, but warned her it could be denied. It was not a victory, but it was ground gained. When Hope returned to Sweetwater, she found Quill mending a fence along the eastern line that he told her riders had been seen nearby earlier that day. Men not from around Clearwater Creek. The warning proved true before the week was out. Hope and Quill were repairing fence when 5 riders came hard across the open ground. Their clothes were worn, their weapons visible. Quill recognized them instantly. Vex Calderon and his crew. Known outlaws. Men wanted for stage robberies and worse. They chased Hope and Quill back to the ranch, firing as they rode. Bullets cracked past them, kicking up dirt. They barely made it into the barn before the doors slammed shut. Calderon did not bother hiding his intent. He told Hope she had 1 week to sell Sweetwater to Falk and leave. He said Thane had been given the same choice. He called murder a market correction. Then he rode away. Hope stood shaking in the barn long after the sound of hooves faded. Fear hit her hard, but anger burned hotter. Thane had been killed for refusing to sell his land. If she left now, his death would mean nothing. That night, Hope rode to the Wren Ranch. Sable listened as Hope laid everything out. Calderon's threat, Falk's pressure, Thane's letter. When Hope finished, Sable sat quiet for a long moment. Then she said what Hope already knew. If they did nothing, Falk would keep pushing. Calderon would return. They decided to set a trap. The sheriff agreed reluctantly. Without proof, Falk was untouchable. But if Calderon threatened Hope again with Falk present or named, they could act. The plan was dangerous. Hope would be bait. and they spread a rumor through town that Hope had received money from back east and planned to expand Sweetwater. She bought supplies that supported the story. Everyone talked. Word traveled fast on the frontier. Falk took the bait. 4 days later, Calderon returned. This time, Falk rode with him. They arrived in the open yard. Confident and careless, Falk offered more money. Calderon threatened violence. Together, they laid out their terms in plain words. Sell or die. Hidden men heard everything. When the sheriff revealed himself, the yard erupted in gunfire. Calderon's men fell back, firing wildly. Falk tried to flee, but was thrown from his horse and captured. Calderon fought like a cornered animal. He dragged Falk in front of him as a shield and threatened to kill him if the law did not stand down. Hope watched from the side of the cabin, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it. Inside, the deputy lay wounded, but alive. Calderon's back was turned. Hope raised Thane's revolver. She did not think about Boston or who she had been. She thought about the man who had built Sweetwater and the future stolen from him. She thought about the land she refused to surrender. She fired once. The bullet struck true. Calderon fell dead on the porch. When the smoke cleared, Falk was arrested, and the remaining outlaws were captured or fled. The sheriff told Hope it would be ruled justifiable. Calderon had been threatening lives. Hope sat alone on the porch afterward, the revolver resting in her lap. She felt no triumph, only a heavy calm. The cost had been high, but Sweetwater still stood. That night, under a sky crowded with stars, a hope made her choice final. She would stay. She would build. And no one would take Sweetwater from her again. The land did not change after the gunfight, but hope did. In the days that followed, Sweetwater Ranch felt quieter than before, as if the valley itself was holding its breath. Blood had darkened the dirt near the porch. Broken boards scarred the barn. Those marks stayed for a while, reminders of how close everything had come to ending. Hope scrubbed and repaired what she could, not to erase the memory, but to move forward. Sheriff Hollow returned with deputies to finish the work. The wounded were tended. Calderon's body was taken away. Falk was hauled into town in irons, his fine coat dusty and torn. Word spread fast. Not the wild version whispered in saloons, but the truth, heard straight from the sheriff's mouth. A Falk had hired killers. He had threatened lives. He had confessed. For the first time since Hope arrived in Wyoming, the danger pulled back. A week later, Hope rode into Clearwater Creek alone. People stopped what they were doing to watch her pass. Some nodded. Some tipped their hats. Others simply stared. She was no longer the mail-order bride people had pitied. She was the woman who stood her ground when men tried to take it by force. Sheriff Hollow met her outside his office. Inside, he poured coffee and handed her a folded document stamped with heavy seals. Her continuation claim had been approved. Sweetwater Ranch was legally hers, as long as she completed the remaining requirements. Hope held the paper carefully, as if it might vanish if she gripped it too tight. It was not just land. It was proof that her fight had mattered. A Falk's trial followed quickly. With witnesses, his confession, and the sheriff's testimony, there was no escaping it. He was sentenced to territorial prison. The man who believed he could buy and bury anyone who stood in his way was gone from the valley for good. When Hope returned to Sweetwater, she found Sable Wren waiting on the porch. "You did good," Sable said simply. Hope nodded. She did not feel brave. She felt tired, but the work still waited. Summer settled in, and Sweetwater began to change. Hope hired another hand. Quill stayed on, steady and loyal. Fences were repaired. The herd grew stronger. The garden expanded beyond anything Hope expected. She hauled produce into town and struck a deal with the trading post. For the first time, Sweetwater brought in steady money. Hope learned every inch of the land. She learned how to read the sky for weather, how to listen to cattle, how to spot trouble before it found her. She wore trousers now when she worked, practical and unashamed. People talked, but less than before. Juniper Vale invited her to gatherings with other women. They shared food, work, and stories. No one treated Hope like a curiosity. She was one of them. At night, Hope still read Thane's letters. The ache never fully left, but it softened. She began to see that Sweetwater was no longer just his dream. It was hers now, too. 2 years passed. The final inspection came on a clear fall morning, and a land office official rode out with Sheriff Hollow and walked the ranch from fence to fence. He checked improvements, records, and boundaries. Hope answered every question without hesitation. When he signed the final papers, Sweetwater Ranch became hers outright. Hope stood on the porch afterward, the patent warm in her hands, and let the moment settle. She had crossed 2,000 miles believing she would become a wife. Instead, she had become something she never imagined. A rancher, an owner, a woman who held her ground. As the sun dipped low, Riven Wren rode up from the north. Over the years, their partnership had grown easy and strong. They shared grazing land, labor, and trust. Riven respected Sweetwater as Hope's, never questioning her authority. He congratulated her quietly and sat beside her as the light faded. But he spoke of the future, careful and honest. Not promises, not pressure, just possibility. Hope listened. She did not answer right away. She looked out over the valley where Sweetwater Creek caught the last of the sun. The land that had tested her, broken her open, and rebuilt her stronger. Whatever came next would be her choice, made from strength, not fear. That night, lantern light glowed warm from the cabin windows. Hope stepped inside, closing the door on the past she had survived and opening herself to the life she had built. She had traveled 2,000 miles to marry a stranger. Instead, she found herself. And Sweetwater Ranch stood as proof that sometimes the future you lose is not the one that was meant for you at all.